Welcome to another Unwinding with Fiber and Fabric. I managed to get outside early this morning, and I am blessed with the sound of chattering birds all around. I've been thinking a lot about wanting to do a video talking about the kind of tools and techniques that I use in preparing for spinning, or how do I deal with the fiber after it's spun. I realized in following some of the conversation from new spinners that there is quite a bit of a learning curve that has something to do without the wheel itself. Oftentimes a new spinner will get a new wheel, and if they're lucky, they will be connected immediately with a really excellent source of information, a store that sells spinning wheels and actually has good spinners there to help answer questions. Because of course, like most any other hobby, any other skill that we learn, any other craft that we take on, you find yourself with a lot of questions of what do I need, what do I don't need, what do I need right now. And in the world of spinning, there are quite a number of variations to the equipment that you might need, really depending on the fiber that you're going to spin. And so I have actually run into a situation where somebody jumped right in and got sheep before they actually understood the tools that they would need for spinning that specific breed of sheep's fiber. Anybody who's been to a fair that shows spinning, or a live history museum that shows the spinning or the sheep, they'll be familiar with something similar to this. They'll probably be larger because I have tiny little carders, but they may be familiar with something like this. And these are wonderful tools. And I didn't bring them out because they are just so gigantic. But they, the combs, they may have seen some of the really scary combs. I'll show a picture of them over here. They may have seen the combs, and if they have seen the combs, they may wonder what's the difference between this and a set of combs. So a lot of times I know people are like, oh, I need carders. I didn't own a pair of carders for the first, probably 4 or 5 years that I was spinning. The fiber that I was spinning did not require a set of combs or set of carders. I still don't use my combs very often. I have used them, and when I need something to really clean, to get into the fiber, to separate the really spinnable fiber from the shorter pieces, combs are wonderful. Fortunately, most of my fleece I can spin without needing to comb it. Every tool has its own purpose, and they're wonderful to have. But are they something that is essential when you first start out spinning? And is it something you want depending on the type of wool? So in the case of the individual I was thinking about, because this was something they were going to do, they were hoping as a kind of a business, because it was something they were going to do as a business, they invested in some stuff that would work really great if they were raising merino, rambouillet, or as I heard the French say, rambouillet, something like that. But, or if they were doing CVM, something that's a fluffier lock. Getting a really wonderful drum carder. If you're going to do a lot of this, yeah, that makes sense. But it doesn't make as much sense if you are going to do something more like the Leicester long wool I showed the other day, or even, and this isn't a very long lock, but it is very, very fine, and this is Wensleydale, and some of the locks are longer than that piece. Let me see if I can find, there we go. Here's a better example of the staple length of the Wensleydale that I'm spinning. Not like that, okay? I wouldn't run this through my hand carders, and I wouldn't run this through my drum carder, because when I spin this, like the stuff that I spun last night, the Wensleydale I spun last, this is going to get thin. This is lacy. This is a whole different type of fiber, and how we use it is going to be different. And this really wants to be more worsted, because it capitalizes on the beauty of the luster, on the shine. And so running it through a drum carder, which is essentially supposed to make a woolen fiber, you kind of want a fluffier, woolier wool, not a fine, silkier wool. Now, there's nothing saying that you couldn't do it, but it's really not the tool. Then I run into people who ask, there's a tool out there that's called a picker. And yes, I think I'd actually like to have a picker someday, because I do have some bags of fleece that are débouillé. If I were doing merino, it would be nice to have something to run it through. And a picker basically is a gadget, a tool. They come in box pickers, they have swing pickers. It's definitely, I'll put the name here. You should look it up if you're curious. But it's this pretty scary looking tool that basically you run this through and it opens all of it up. Okay? It's not like a carder. It's not aligning the fiber in any way. It's just opening out. It's doing this. It's picking the wool apart. And when you pick the wool apart like this, a lot of the vegetable matter, a lot of the sand, I have a Shetland fleece that a picker would be great for. A lot of sand, it falls out. And once it's been picked into this fluffy little puff of a cloud, it can go to the hand carders or the drum carder, and it can be carded really quickly, and it can be turned into bats off the drum carder. It can be turned into roll-logs. It can be spun from cloud. Now, since I have this fiber on the carder at the moment, there's some wonderful video, especially when you're using the larger carders, of how you do something like this and it rolls it over, and then you roll it over and you pull it back, and that's how you get a true roll-log. Okay? It's one of those coordination things that some people make it look so easy, and then I try it and it just it doesn't work. So this is one of the other tools I keep, just a dowel. It's a simple dowel from the hardware store, cut to the size that's convenient for my storage, for my use. And I have gone over it with, you can go over it with some olive oil, some wax. In my case, I have rendered some of the lanolin from the different fleeces over the years, and so I rubbed it in my lanolin. I can take the dowel if I want to make the roll log. In this case, it's really, they call it a faux log because it's a little tighter than a roll log. But I can roll it off, pull it off, and now I have a roll log. And spinning from a roll log is really spinning from a roll log and then using a long draw, you get a fluffy woolen yarn. Very simple, not hard. You make all these little worms, and you put them aside, and there you have it. So, a dowel. So, back to the point I was making. People, when they get into spinning, they can be inundated with, oh my goodness, you need all this. But at the same time, they may not get any information of what I should get and what I shouldn't get. A lot of people, depending on the fleece they're starting out with, just start out with something like this. It's a dog slicker brush. And going back to this lovely CDM, if all I'm trying to do is open up the lock, first of all I'm trying to do is open up the lock so that I can spin it. See, there's a little short end that I want to get rid of. Okay. I just have to pick it open. And I'll sit down with a big bag of this, and I'll sit down with a big bowl or basket, and I'll just pick it apart, and then once it is like this, into the bowl it'll go. Now, if I'm picking through a huge amount for a big project, I'll have a big bin, big tub, wash tub type thing, big bowl. But once it's picked apart, I put it in, and it's ready to either be spun or to be carded. Now, as you saw here, I picked apart some, I carded it into a roll log. You can do that all and pick it apart, card it into the roll log, that all works. But one of the things, depending on the fleece that you're working with, if the fleece has a lot of vegetable matter hidden inside of it, you want to pick that out. You want to have all that fall out before you card. So, I will take this in multiple steps. And that brings me to this tool, the drop cloth, the lap cloth. And I make my lap cloths 40 inches by 40 inches because that's the width of the fabric when it comes off the bolt. And I will put two pieces together. I will sew around the edge, leaving a small open like a pillowcase, turn it right side out, and then close up the opening, and then I will stitch here along the edge one more time, holding everything in place, so when it goes through the wash, it stays in this form, and I don't have to fuss too much to get it to lay back down. A number of people have found that if you do a dark side and a light side, that it helps when you're spinning dark fibers and light fibers, because then you can see what's in your lap. So that's another tip, just having a lap cloth to catch the debris. When I first started out, pillowcase works, an old tablecloth works. Anything that you have on hand that you can just put in your lap. A spinning apron works. If I'm working on a particularly dirty, no, I shouldn't say dirty, because it's been scoured. If I am working on a particularly vegetable matter filled, sand filled fleece, even if I have the apron, I will use a drop cloth because I can roll it on top of itself. For instance, this were on my lap. I put it in my lap like this. I'd be picking apart the fiber in my lap. The debris would fall to my lap. I would roll it up, roll it into itself, take it like this outside, and shake it off. Saves my floor. So, when you're picking a fiber, you can go right to the carding stage. However, you might find, depending on how much hidden material is in your fleece, it's better to do two different steps. Pick it, then card it, because all that debris that's in your lap, you don't want to go back into your roll log accidentally from just contact. So, back to the slicker. A lot of people will find that the slicker has teeth very similar to a carder. You can pick apart with it. You can even, and there's larger dogs. This is a little one that I have for back from when I had my rabbits and grooming the cats. But you can get larger ones. And with the larger ones, you can make, they're like half the size of this. So you can still use it to card your fiber, to open it up, to blend it, to make the little roll log. I just brought this one because it was easy to find. Now, I will say there's another reason to use it, to have something like this. I use these because after I have been doing particularly clingy fleece or Angora, you can comb yourself and take the hair. And if you have long-haired cats and you're trying to groom yourself after grooming the cat, it works. I wouldn't use it. I've used it on t-shirts, and I've used it on strong wovens, and I've used it on some furniture. It picks up the cat hair. So this is also a good tool if you have long-haired cats like I do to keep the cat hair off. You just use it. Okay. And before I forget, speaking of doing all of this, and I'm going to show you some more tools here in a second, but speaking of the cleanup, and I'm kind of going over, but speaking of the cleanup, there is a wonderful tool that I have taken on. I have found. I have long-haired cats, and when we moved into the house, the carpet that we put in was probably a shade too light for our long-haired cats. And it was driving me crazy because they would shed, and I felt like I was needing to vacuum every single day. And it was kind of driving me crazy. It was driving my husband crazy. And I was trying to figure out a solution. And the solution is this. And as a spinner, as someone who's had long hair most of, except for 10 years of their life, you get a lot of fiber on the floor. You get a lot of hair on the floor. Long-haired cats, you get a lot of hair on the floor. And as a quilter, you get a lot of string on the floor. And all of that can be vacuumed up, but longer strands can get wrapped around the brushes of the vacuum. And so this actually ended up being something that was a solution for not just the fact that my cat shed every day, but also for the fact that I had lots of string on the floor and I had lots of long hair on the floor. Because for some reason, now that I'm going so gray, my hair is definitely more brittle and I shed a lot. But this is just a standard kind of scrub brush. It's a stiff bristle, and I'm actually pulling some of the last stuff I brushed off. It's a stiff bristle, and it has a hole so that I can put in a handle. And I just use this and brush over area of carpet that the cats have been laying and shedding, or area that I've been spinning, and this picks up all the fiber. So as somebody who has lots of fiber floating around, whether it is wool, whether it is a string from the fabric in the quilting, whether it is her own hair, this is a time-saving tool. I can take that and brush up the bad areas every day, and it takes me 2 minutes. And then pull out the vacuum as I need to vacuum up all the rest of the stuff that you can't see. So this is one of my new favorite tools, a stiff bristle brush that pulls up the debris off the floor that would otherwise kind of clog up a vacuum. Trust me, even after using this, I will fill a vacuum with cat hair because I have really long-haired cats and I have long hair. My daughter, because of COVID, now has long hair. And so and I spin, and so there's just fiber everywhere. And in the sewing room, yeah, you get thread. You get thread all over you. No matter how hard you try, you put on black pants, and you're either going to be covered in cat hair or covered in thread when you live in a house that you are a quilter and a spinner. It's just the way it is. So that's one of my favorite tools. But back to the whole processing of the wool. There is another tool that I want to show. It's kind of like this is actually something from one of the companies that sells drum carders. But it's basically a fingernail brush. Stiff bristle fingernail brush. This is wonderful to clean out the teeth of a drum carder, of your hand cards. It works really well also after you've spun the yarn and you've crocheted it into a cute little fluffy animal, and you want that fluffy animal to be fluffier, brush over the yarn and the yarn is going to bloom. So it has another tool, another purpose. You can use this to make your finished object bloom by brushing it. So I have that tool. I also have some nitty naughties, and these are what we, after we've spun our yarn, we have plied our yarn, we use these to wrap the yarn off and tie them into hanks. I'll include a picture here of one I've done recently. This is a 2-yard nitty naughty. This is a 1-yard nitty naughty. And what that means is that when the fiber is wrapped around all 4 sides, it equals 1 yard of fiber equals 2 yards of fiber. I have another one somewhere that I think it's close to 1.5 yards. It doesn't matter what their measurement is as long as you measure and check it. I have skein winder that I can use also to wind on. And with that, its circumference is something like 61 inches. So I just use that measurement when I multiply it by the number of wraps to get my yardage. So those are useful tools to have. Those are things that new spinners really should have. And then the other thing is if you're working with a ball winder, and I like to use the ball winder also to make the center pool balls that I ply from, a plying ball. So a ball winder that is easy to have around, that, you know, half the time I don't even attach it to something. I will just hold it like this and wind. So a ball winder is another essential tool. So those are some of the essential tools that I use. Now, in addition, I like to have, as you might see in some of my other videos, I like to have wooden bowls. They don't static electricity doesn't affect them, so your fiber isn't sticking to them the same way. So I showed you the CVM, how the CVM can be so easily picked apart or fluffed into a roll log. It's just a fluffy fiber. Here is its lock. There we go. There's a staple length of that specific lock. There is the lock. I open it up, and because I know these sheep, they lived with little coats on during the winter. It's clean. It's beautiful. There's not much that's coming out of it. So I could go right to spinning. I could go right to carding. That's a wonderful CVM. Okay. Set that aside. So with the Wensleydale, if I want to spin it from the lock, I am not going to, I'm going to try when I'm opening it up to find the lock and open it up and then spin. That piece doesn't lend itself to good. There we go. So this one here. Now, even with the dirty stuff I did the other day, I actually did just open up the fiber that I was going to spin. I might do 2 or 3 bunches like this at the most. Spin them right at that time. I won't open up any more. Now you could open them up and very gently lay them in your bowl, all going in the same direction. Then you could go and clean off your lap robe if need be. But because there are so many of these type of sections, unless you're going to have 2 different piles, I tend to just go ahead and open it up and go right to the spinning. So that shows you how a longer lock, and definitely with Leicester long wool, that's what you're going to, you know, opening it up just like that. That's picking it open. And again, I guess you, and I have done this, you can card this. This isn't too long. You can card this, but it doesn't make, to me, it doesn't feel like it really makes, it doesn't take advantage of the properties of this wool. to card it. Combing this would definitely be highlighting the advantages of this wool. But I would probably only take it to the combs if I really wanted to make sure I had very clean, very free of shortcuts, very free of neps, fiber to spin fine, fine lace. That would be about the only reason I would get out the combs for it, because it just spins up as it is so nicely. But if you're doing a project that you're really wanting to have fine and clean and just big airplane nearby, and fine and clean and very delicate, using the combs, that's going to help get rid of the short pieces, anything that might interfere with a smooth spin. And this is the fiber that I think I'll probably end up spinning today. This is the fin sheep. And I should have looked up a little bit more about the fin sheep before I did this. I was going to go and look in the book. The thing that's really interesting about the fin sheep, just taking a look at it, it has the fluffiness on first look of something like the CVM, but it has a longer lock and there's a little bit of luster, and the tips are a little yellowed. I have a feeling this is probably this might be from a lamb, honestly. I don't think I have that information. Or it could just be that it got, its tips are just a little bit yellowed. But here's the thing. That's picking it open. Now there is some vegetable matter, a little bit of it, not much. There are some areas right around the cut that have felted a little bit in the wash. As I pick it apart, I can pick out, now you know why it's called picking, I can pick out the vegetable matter that I see, and there. Now, and vegetable matter is falling out as I do this. It's too small for you to see on the camera, I'm sure. But as I do this, little micro vegetable matter is falling out, and I'm getting a nice, clean group of fiber that I can go and spin. Now, maybe it's because I'm lazy, and maybe it's because I just really appreciate a more worsted spun to get the luster. But I'm going to probably just spin this right from the lock. But with that being said, I wanted to show that this could be carded. Now, definitely by doing that, it's helping open everything up. And I could turn this into a roll log very easily. And I could spin it woolen. So, why would I do that rather than that? Well, first and foremost, when I spin it from this and I do a long draw, there's going to be air in this. It's going to be there. Worsted, think of your smooth, slick yarns they're smooth, they're not grabbing anything, there's not little fluff coming off of them. So they knit up in a smoother fabric. They weave up well because you can use them for warp more easily. You don't have lots of little hairs grabbing on anything as it's going through the loom. Woolen is like it sounds. It's fluffier. It has more air in it. So a worsted is going to have all the fibers going in one direction. We're going to spin it, pulling along the length of the lock. All the fibers are going in one direction, and while you will get some fuzz, you get a lot less fuzz. Woolen, after carding it, you can see the fibers are going in every direction. And you will get you can even just see it here. It's just a fluffier hairier spin. Another airplane. So, worsted, I don't know if the camera, but it makes a smoother finish. It makes an airy, fluffy finish. And while I have very sensitive skin and would not want to wear this against my skin if it was woolen, and I like to wear woolens, particularly in my sweaters, other people may not have any problem with it. The more air that you have in it, the more insulating property it has. There we go. That's a good way of putting it. But worsted, I really would have to, I'm tugging, and this is not even plied. This is barely spun, and it does not want to break. Okay? Whereas, if I twist this and everyone's coming out, this pulls apart. So I'm getting a lot of airplane traffic now for just a bit. So that's the other part. A woolen fiber versus a worsted. A worsted is a much stronger yarn. So socks. Think socks. It's going to hold up to wear better. Elbows of sleeves. So when we spin and we decide to go worsted versus woolen, that's one of the things. What are we using it for? What we're using it for can help us decide what fleece. So this could definitely be a good woolen. It has some good woolen properties, as you can just see from its lock. It has some good woolen properties. It also has some wonderful worsted properties. So I'm really liking the Finn sheep because it's versatile. Not everything has to be next to skin soft. And truthfully, this isn't irritating to me much. I have very hypersensitive skin. So, sorry, I'm getting now fur on my face. So even a merino can make me itch if I'm not careful. But for people who aren't as sensitive, don't be afraid to do your spin based upon how you want to have it. If you want a really woolly sweater that's going to have lots of air pockets in it to really insulate you and keep you warm, this works. Go, get out the carders and do woolly. If you want something that's going to be really durable and really hold up to a lot of wear and tear, go worsted. Go a little bit in between, semi-worsted, semi-woolen. That's what most of us end up doing. Maybe we'll card it, but then we'll do a spin that's a more worsted type spin, a shorter draw, as opposed to the long draw. Maybe we'll do a long draw, but we're using a long staple length fiber, and so it's more of a worsted prep, but a longer draw to it. So I've gone a little bit longer in time than I expected with this, but I hope it does answer some of the questions people might have about the different tools and the different types of fibers we have. And my CVM is actually still a fairly decent sized lock. You can actually spin stuff that's a little bit even shorter than this, but we have a short, fine fiber. We have a mid-range fiber. We have a longer fiber. And each one has a purpose, and there's some wonderful materials and books out there that can help you to understand the difference of what fleece is and what they tend to be used for, and show samples. So I recommend, if you're really looking at working with fleece and you're kind of curious, to get one of the wonderful encyclopedias, you might call, of the fleece. And don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to take, if you're buying a fleece, don't be afraid to buy a fleece and experiment with it. See how you want to, how it works, how it spins up, and understand a lot more about why we have so many different types of sheep and so many different types of fiber. There was a lot of need for it before we had synthetics, before we had the abundance of cotton, before we had all of the machine processed fibers that we have today. Wool covered so much of it, covered so many different things. Other than a few plant materials that were used, wool was the basic. Wool was it. And wool can, as we now see, if you follow things like Campaign for Wool out of the UK, oh my goodness, wool can be used for so many different things and so many different purposes. Understanding the wool you have and how it can be used, that's just the first step. Having basic tools, not necessarily running out there and buying a bunch of stuff that you may not need. If all you're going to ever do is spin prepared roving, you don't need carders. You can just spin right from the roving. With that being said, it's really cool if you take a dyed braid of roving, and instead of spinning it from the roving, you pull off chunks and you card it. You can get a completely different fiber. But it's not necessary. But if you're buying fleece, if you have a friend that raised sheep, you might need some different tools. But before you run out and get the tools, understand what you use them for. Carders are fabulous for your short and mid-range length wools. Combs are fabulous if you're wanting to really get a bunch of the material clean, but they are really hard to use if the staple length is short. I know this because that is the only way I could get some Shetland that I had clean, was to use my combs first. It was the only way to get in there and get the sand and material out. But it's also, I wasn't using them in the way that you will see someone getting combed fiber prepared. And that's the thing. Roving has a tendency to be either a generic name that we use, or specifically it is a carded fiber. Top is a combed fiber. That's the difference. I had some beautiful combed top that I just did not want to spin in a worsted fashion. I did not want the frustration of spinning it in the top form because it was just slippery and it was a little frustrating, and I didn't want a frustrating spin. So I pulled off chunks and I carded them into roll hooks and I spun them from that. It's your fiber. You can do what you want. But I wouldn't use my carders very often on something like a Leicester long wool. It would have to be a really fine lamb. I would have to really specifically be wanting to make a woolen prep for something that I wasn't going to wear next to my skin, but maybe an outer layer. Because it spins just beautifully from the lock. So my motto is, why put in the extra work when it does something on its own? When it wants to do something on its own, let it do what it wants. Don't fight the wool. Embrace what the fiber wants to do. There are tons of ways to use it. It can be woven, it can be knitted, it can be crocheted, it can be it can be given to a friend and have them weave it if you don't weave. There are a number. We can use it for rugs, we can use it for hats, for capes, for sweaters, for socks, for I have a ton of it that I use for hot pads on my table. It can be used for different things. Not all wool needs to go on your feet. Not all wool needs to go on your head. There are a lot of other ways to use the wool. And it doesn't have to be a tremendously difficult thing to figure out. Some basic things. Things that you might already have around your home. that's sometimes all you need to get started with. All right, well, I will wrap this up. There is a big, gigantic spider over there I have got to get a photo of. I've never seen one that big before. And, well, I should say I've seen one that big in zoos, and I need to get a picture of that thing because, wow. So I think I'm going to wrap this up and wish you a happy day of spinning. And I'm going to go in and spin up some fin sheep today. I hope you've had a wonderful time joining me for another Unwinding with Fiber and Fabric, and we will see you again soon, if I survive the spider. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. Someone is being a big baby this morning and saying he wants a cuddle before he will let me do my recording. Yes. Are you gonna look at the camera? See the camera? He's like, I don't see a camera. I hear birdies and I want the birdies. No.